Hi, my name is Frank May, and this is my exhibition called Taste at M Galleries PNA. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being here for this gallery talk. So a major influence that's a non-art influence is philosophy. And Marshall McLuhan, Slavoj Žižek, and Jean Baudrillard are all philosophers that I think about and apply to my art making because they all center around the idea of the power of media. And I'm a big advocate for a multimedia experience because we have multisensory organs, right? So I want to address all those types of senses in the kind of work that I do art-wise. This particular show, probably the most significant influence is an artist named Richard Prince. And Richard Prince, one of his exhibitions is that he took screenshots of Instagram posts that he posted online and commented and used those screenshots and made prints of them, large-scale versions. And I found that very interesting because the comments that were made became the signature of the work. So his Instagram handle became the signature. And these weren't posts that he made himself. So it was somewhat controversial because artists would come in and people would come in and recognize images that they posted on Instagram. And I said, why is this guy selling this thing for $30,000? So he has put his stamp on the work in the virtual world. So, and similarly to this work, what I love about one of the aspects of these prints is that it by default puts in my signature, like Richard Prince. So the program itself, right? Yeah, well, it's all this ready-made stuff. So we'll get more into the work, but I love, using the Design Home app on my phone to create these images. So you'll get the branding of Design Home, you get the ready-made titles and the ready-made signatures. So I love all those ready-made aspects of the work. And a ready-made score. Yes, right, the score comes from the game. So Design Home is a game, and there are, I imagine thousands of people that play this game, right? So, and I love that part of it, that it's I submit these designs to the Design Home world, and they come back to me with whether or not they like it or not. And so probably the core element of this work is trying to create a design that is bad, and design that is funny and ridiculous. And I love imagining other Design Home players looking at these things, trying to figure out what's the purpose of this and what was happening in the mind of this designer. The most interesting kind of art is the art that leans into that. That it's about the creation, the experiencing, and that is very much today. It's very contemporary. The absurdity of that is reflected in the imagery. I find the instant world very absurd, and I love thinking about that. I find that's a very good thing. And I'm not saying that artists, I'm an advocate for fast and slow work too. So slow work's important, but it's important to understand the time that we're living in, and it's important to also somewhat rage against it. So simultaneously, I feel like artists should be across, spanning multiple media and multiple mindsets of how to produce work. Oh. I try, if I'm aware of a medium, I have a series in it. Yes, so until once, and there's a few things, maybe fashion, I need to kind of figure out, but I have series in sculpture, painting, photography, performance art, digital, conceptual, poetry, writing, music. So all the senses, I need to have a series in a food thing and a touch thing. So touch and food, or touch and the touch and, well, it's funny, like that this is about taste, right? So, but I do want to I would like to have a series of work in that sense, like we were talking about earlier, about addressing the senses, what I'm striving to do, but I try to have a series in all the ways to create, all the kind of archetypal ways to create. My base medium, my core medium is clay, and clay has opened me up. I say that clay is the lens in which I see all the other media. So whatever series I do, clay is how I perceive it. Right, clay is like the foundation. So like how I look at a media, it's extruded through my clay experience. Probably the biggest lesson that clay has given me is about waste, and be very careful and be very mindful of waste, and try to be as least wasteful as possible. And think about the waste stuff, like I call it negative making. Like what I like to do is negative make. So what's behind the scenes, what's the background, and that's where the waste is. And that's where you can start to collect that stuff. That's a lot. That's equally valid as the positive. The negative and the positive are a balance. Of the title of the show. The title of the show is simply Taste. And whenever I title anything, I try to justify every letter. And I try to be as minimal as possible. There's a pragmatism to that, because posting something online, like character limits, are important. So there's a very pragmatic way to think about that. But also I try to think of a word that best describes multiple aspects of what the show is about. And thinking about taste, I think about good and bad taste to start out with. It always is about dualities for me. And so the quote that I use in my write-up is from Marshall McLuhan, and it is, "Good taste is the first refuge of the non-creative, and it is the last-ditch stand of the artist." So there's two parts to this. So good taste is the first refuge of the non-creative. The way that I interpret that is that those who don't know how to have a environment or even a way to think default to good taste, right? So they default to the other to tell them what is tasteful, what is worth having in your space. And I feel like that's very problematic. So I like the feeling of that quote from Marshall McLuhan about good taste is the first refuge of a non-creative. It's a little dig, at society in general. Right. Yes, that's perfect. You can't think for yourself, so you're just going to default to good taste. And the second part of that is, it is the last-ditch stand of the artist. So the way I interpret that is that the creative, the artist, it's when they're at their wits' end. They've failed as an artist. So they're going into good taste. It's the last-ditch stand of the creative mind. They're done, right? And they're falling into taste, into good taste. And so that's kind of how I think about both those phrases. And I've had wonderful discussions about taste with my colleagues, and I was asking them just recently about how they feel about good and bad taste, because I'm of the opinion that good art, almost by its nature, has a very bad taste element to it. So bad taste is somehow critical in something that is, I would consider like a meaningful work of art. I think that meaning and bad taste are somewhat linked, and hence this show, this idea of I would like the viewer to incorporate some bad taste, like a small piece of bad taste in their home. And this is about designing a home. So this is kind of meta, that it's an image of a setting that is meant to go into a home setting. And I think a lot of the time, I get a lot of, especially as a gallerist, I do difficult work, contemporary work, and the comment I hear often is, the comment that I hear often is that this artwork I love, but it won't fit into my home. I have no place for it. It doesn't fit. I love it. I love to experience it, but it doesn't fit in my home. And I really implore that person to rethink that, because there's having a stain, having a little bit of like I call Persian flaw in their setting may stir up something. It's like when you eat chocolate and chili. So that's why, because the chili will waken up your taste buds, right? And then you experience the chocolate differently. And that's what visually something like this does. It stirs up the visual, and then you experience it in the same thing in a slightly different way. So so the question is, why the content? Why the content? And so I love working with limitations. I love limitations because with art, a lot of things are very open, and I think an interesting thing to do as an artist is to self-limit. And this is a great example of that. Like, I'm limited to a lot of aspects of the work, but what I can control, certain aspects of that, I love that kind of shines with the imagery.
Can you give me an example? What kind of limitations exist?
Okay, so there's limitations in the game. The game basically has an economy of its own. There's money that you can buy, furniture. Like, you start, for those who haven't played the game, you start with a template, all right? You start with a template of a place, and there's some hardwired things in the image. And you're allowed to put certain things in certain areas. And depending on the size, like for example, depending on the size of the table, will I be able to put my stuffed bunny? And put the furniture in certain areas depending on the size, depending on the contest. So sometimes it limits you to certain brands. And that's what I love about this, is that this is all 3D scans of real things in the world. And that's why they have space limitations, because in the end, Design Home wants you to click on the website of a designer and buy their furniture, right? So what's offered is real things. And that's what I find so interesting with this, is that when I search I try to find the most absurd pieces of furniture, and there's this, like the humor of what's available, what's created in reality, I cry. It's so amazing, the things that are available in reality. So and there's been reoccurring items that I've grown to love, and I like seeing that repeated and reimagined in these different settings. And we talked about the titles being ready-made. I love kind of traveling the world too. This is Bangkok, and then we have Savannah. And so it's all, most of the time, it's a specific location that they're having you think about. And I love completely forgetting about that every time. For example, any location I enjoy putting if it's a welcome to LA or family in North Carolina, I love throwing in this very loud New York poster. Of course, the family in LA is going to be a big fan of New York City, and North Carolina is going to be a fan of New York City. So that's the visual joke that I'm going with on a regular basis. And it's just seeing that over and over again is just a delight, to know And another thing that I recently been enjoying is putting in a pile of firewood, but never with a fireplace. So you just have a pile of firewood for no purpose.
Oh, yes, like Savannah Sunshine.
Correct, yeah. So there's plenty of examples where I throw that in there, where they let me put in a pile of firewood for no apparent reason.
Okay, that's
And the one time that I did do a fireplace was a fireplace that clearly is not using wood. It's a gas fireplace. So I like these, when you look close at the work, there's all these visual jokes and absurdities, that humor is part of everything that I do. And I feel like that's a hallmark of contemporary / or postmodern art, that you can either look at the world as a tragedy or as a comedy. So it's kind of like, I mean, maybe it extends back to theater. So we have the frowny face and the smiley face, right? So theater is both tragedy and comedy. And I feel like that extends to humanity in general. And I think it's better to think of the world as a comedy, or to think of as an absurdity. So that becomes a foundational element in how I produce my work, that I feel it's healthier to laugh at the world than to cry at the world. Not that you can't do both, but I think to lean into the humorous part of it can help you process all the dark things, and better, and you'll be in a place, in a healthier place mentally and physically. So the way that I've been producing these things is, once you submit the design, there isn't a rating yet. So that becomes a print for me. So I have unrated versions of these, and I have post-rated versions of these. So after the rating comes back, there's two. I've started, maybe not this series, because this was early on, but recently, I've continued to do this body of work, on a regular basis. Try to do it at least daily. And so so after a few days, a rating will come back from the Design Home world, the Design Home app world. And I've struggled to get this low score. I was expecting that I could somehow get to a 0. My goal was to get the 0 out of 5. And having done some research on the game, it defaults to 2. So 2 is the lowest possible score you can get. So there isn't anything below a 2, unfortunately. So it's like,
Can you view other people's ratings for things?
You can, yeah. You can go into different people's, see their, because I have gotten below a 3 one time. It was a 2.37, which I think is at the gallery.
It seems so strange to me that you can't get lower than that with some of these
Right. So,
choices.
well, the idea, I get it that Design Home doesn't want to make you think that you're worthless, right? So they're gonna start, even if you're doing bad designs, they're gonna want you to continue to play the game, right? So starting at 2 makes sense for the design, because I doubt there are few people like me that want to get a low score, right? So.
Taste is not what's important here. It's
Right.
consumerism.
Right, so I was trying to play Design Home golf, what's the lowest score I can get? And I learned that 2 was the bottom, okay? But in my research, and I was trying to figure out what would be like a good score, being the 2. Okay, so 2 is almost impossible to get. And I learned that getting below a 3.5 is very, very difficult. I've tried minimal things, I've tried maximal things, I've tried clashing things, everything I could, and it's so very difficult to get below 3.5. But when I do, I consider that an A, right? I give myself an A for getting below a 3.5. So for example, I got a 3.36 here, so that's a very successful piece to me. And here, I got a 4.18 out of 5, and this is a failure. I consider this, and I like showing the failures and the successes and the confusion of that too. Like, yes, because over a 4, you win a prize in the game. So I try to fight. I never want to win anything, right? And it's frustrating. So, so anything below a 3.5 is an A. Anything between a 3.5 and a 3.7, I give myself a B. Anything between a 3.7 and a 3.9 is a C. Between 3.9 and 4, I consider a D. And then anything above a 4 is total failure. I know that, those who are rating, part of me thinks that the raters will look at these, like, I get strangely high scores on things that look really crazy to me, but I think I can't tell if they're giving me a good rating because it's silly. I'll never know. Like, I would love to know the mindset of the rater, and I wish there was some way. And in my fantasy is that they'll see my website, because that's my name is my website, frankmay.net. So this says designed by frankmay.net. So I'm hoping maybe someday I'll get a notification from someone from Design Home asking me, like, what is this about? I really want that question to come up, because I'm trying to, like, point to the viewer to say, hey, come and, communicate with me. I'm intentionally putting something, my name and my website, as my signature. In what world do I beat anybody? Right? Where someone actually tries. And in the ratings that I've personally done, I haven't seen anybody go this way, of making it intentionally ridiculous. So the future of this idea, what I would love, I'm going to continue doing this on a regular basis, and I love that I'm able to have my little studio, which is my phone, that I can build these things and create these things in a very easy and fast way, like we were talking about earlier, and have the room be both the imagery and the objects. So maybe at some point, a Design Home installation will happen. And so I'm going to make an attempt at that idea after doing this for a little while longer, maybe building up some resources. So I love thinking about seeing the objects in the space and then the image of the object simultaneously is an exciting prospect. So, but yeah, I want to come back to the what drives me to do what I do, because I don't think I fully addressed that in at the other scene. But so the driving force for me is that I feel like that art is a very practical thing, is a very pragmatic thing, it's a very useful thing. I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's designed like a triangle, and the base is like physiology, survival, and then at the top is self-actualization. And that's where art is. But the problem with the visual of the triangle is that it's like minimal. It's like a small part. You have the base that's really large, the physiology part, but you got this tiny little self-actualization thing at the top. And I feel like that is misleading. I don't think that that's really accurate in a visual way. What's more accurate is if it's a square. So yes, physiology is important, and all these other layers are built on that, but it's as important to have self-actualization as a human being as physiology. So I'm making that argument. People tend to think art is a luxury or art is frivolous, and I think it's almost the opposite. That it's there's a great quote from Julian Schnabel. I love it, artist and film director and really brilliant person in general. And he was saying that he was looking at the newspaper, and there's arts and leisure, right? That's like a category in the newspaper. And he said, I can't think of two more opposite things than arts and leisure. Is that art is work? Art is what I would say somewhat of a desperate act, like it has to happen.
Yes.
And that's why I love working in so many different ways, like fast and slow things. Like, so this is a fast show, meaning that it can be produced very quickly, but also it's important to have the slow side. So that's my sculpture and painting, things that take a while to produce, and having both in my arsenal allows for me to absorb the world and address the world. Like having an exchange is very important. So like the drive, like what drives me to do what I do is the exchange, you know, that you have a dialogue with reality, you know, as internally, externally, and there comes back to that duality thing. You know, I think that that's a very core human thing, is to have a dialogue with the external and the internal. And art is a way to kind of bridge that gap. You know, it could be any kind of creative thing where you contribute something. Like, I feel like it's important to consume art, but it's equally important to produce it. And that's everybody. I think everybody needs to do that, or that I would highly recommend anybody to have an artistic thing in their space, like what they do, and also having quality artwork in their home. When you go out to a department store and buy something, there's no story there, or it's a very, very superficial story, right? And you know, the story is I drove in my car, I picked it up, and I came back and I put it on the wall. But when you got, right, after I peeled that off, right? So, but I like art that I call this, that to me is candy art. You know, it's like superficial. You know, it may taste good, it may look good, but it doesn't nourish you over time. But like, right. And what I call broccoli art is art that it may not be sexy, you know, may not be something that will, like we're talking about, fit in your space, but over time, it'll nourish you. You know, and that's what I like to show in my gallery. That's what I like to produce. I like to produce works that have, like we're talking about, that bad taste, to, you know, create that friction, you know, that you're not going to just necessarily walk by the painting from the department store every day and you completely ignore it. Like, it becomes part of the background, right? And you don't even think about it. It doesn't even exist. And I like art that makes you stop, and you're like, oh, you know, like, that's what I want in my space. Something that is affirming. Like it's an object that is loud. Yeah. Thank you for watching and listening. I really appreciate you being here and also watching, you know, the video. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. So my name is Frank May, and this is Taste at M Galleries PNA. And so thank you very much.